let's talk some Peach Bowl aftermath, right? It was very much heat of the moment, immediate aftermath. Last time I talked to you on Wednesday about what happened between Arizona State and Texas. What kind of an impact is that going to have on the Big 12 moving forward? And hear me out, I know it'll sound crazy, was losing that game actually better for the Big 12 in the long run? Stay with me on that. I will make somewhat of a case for it. And I'm not saying losing in general, losing in this specific fashion, okay? Because it was not a blowout, even though it looked like it was going to be early on. 14-3 before you could really blink because of a two-play Texas touchdown drive and then a return touchdown where there may have, if we're going to be in the business of, trying to relitigate the officiating, maybe an illegal blindside block on that punt return touchdown. I'm not going to complain too much about it, but I did see that making the rounds on Twitter. Either way, it was 14-3, and it seemed like Texas was, going to send everybody heading for the exits very early. The Arizona State just kind of withstood, man, for a while. That defense really bowed up, kept them in the game until the offense could start to come around. And then eventually it did come around. And back to this SEC narrative, I mean, Arizona State put up 510 yards of total offense, which the only two teams to hit over 350 on Texas the entire year were Clemson and Arizona State. The two teams they played in the playoff, the two teams that were not from the SEC. Two teams from non-Power 2 leagues in the ACC and the Big 12. We heard about this vaunted Texas defense. They played an SEC schedule all year, got fat and happy. Hell, Georgia didn't even break 300 yards in either game that they played against Texas. Arizona State rolled up 510. That's a damn good performance, and it took them a while to get going. Like, that was not even happening at first. It took Arizona State a while to get the machine rolling as far as that goes. Then you got to see the Cam Scatterbo heroics. He turns himself into basically the stuff of legend in college football. It's really unfortunate that Arizona State started as such an unknown this year because I think many people probably saw like one, maybe 1.5 games out of the dude this year, the entire season long, and not actually enjoying the spectacle that he was in college football as much this year as they probably should have. We should consider ourselves lucky here in Big 12 country. But I know that a lot of people did watch him. And how do I know that? Because we got the numbers for TV on the college football playoff quarterfinal games. And man, look at this number. Look at this number that Texas and Arizona State did. 17.3 million. 17.3 million for Texas and Arizona State in the Peach Bowl. It was 4 million behind Ohio State, Oregon. Rose Bowl number probably would have been a lot higher had that actually been a competitive game. It was not from the jump, but you outdid Notre Dame, Georgia. Some of that's going to be affected, obviously, by time slot. I understand that, where the game had to get moved. And then Boise and Penn State, certainly well in front of that. But this was a record-breaking performance for Arizona State and Texas in the Peach Bowl. Not only does that number just seem great, like, all right, 17.3 million viewers, that sounds awesome. That was a record for a bowl game that kicked off before 3 p.m. That is a record for a bowl game that kicked off before 3 p.m. Largest audience ever for a bowl game that kicked off before 3 p.m. Eastern. The audience number was so big. Like, think about this. Is another way to put it in perspective. This is from John Wilner. A really good stat here. 28 million people watched Arizona State's last two games. So you're adding, like 10 mil or so from the Big 12 championship game to that number. 28 million people watched Arizona State's last two games. That is 3 times the total audience for their 12 regular season games. You add up the regular season games that Arizona State played, the entire audience that watched Cam Scatterbo the rest of the season, and take it times 3, and then you're getting that number of what they had combined in the last 2 games there. So that can have a legitimate impact, man. Unfortunately for Scatterbo, like, he's not coming back next year. That would definitely help if you're talking about formulating some Heisman hype and more hype for Arizona State in general, though this definitely will still help. Like, that's the kind of exposure that you're just not going to find anywhere else. And as good as the Big 12 championship exposure is, So much better when you've got this. You've got the automatic berth into the playoff. And this goes back to a point I made in the offseason. If you're talking about brand building, much bigger opportunity to do this than, say, a couple of years ago, K-State wins the Big 12 championship game. They go to the Sugar Bowl and play Alabama, which sounds great. It's not doing anywhere near 17 million because people don't care nearly as much about that as they do a game with the stakes of the playoff. So you get a Big Daddy brand in a playoff game. Yeah, 17.8 million people watch you go out and do your thing and come within one play and a controversial call of beating Texas. That's huge. That is huge for Arizona State. And I'm telling you this, okay? There is a case to be made. I know you want to win the game. I know it. And believe me, if I could hit a button, if you gave me that Staples easy button, and I could just hit the button and say, Arizona State wins the game if I do this, they decide to back off into more of a shell instead of running a blitz on 4th and 13 and they can bat the pass down, I would do it in a heartbeat. Would love to see it. It would be hilarious. Right now, as strong as this SEC narrative is right now, what would it be evidence-wise if they had nobody left in the playoff and had just lost to the Big 12? It would be great. I would take it. But if we're thinking about the long-term ramifications of all of this and the effects, I would say we should probably invite some TCU fans into this discussion. You got to invite some TCU fans into this discussion and ask them what their discourse is like with SEC fans about their run 2 years ago in 2022. TCU played Michigan. They beat Michigan, who would then not lose until after winning a national championship the next season. That was a hell of a win. It was an incredible game. It was a thrilling game. It was a massive win in that 4-team playoff era when everybody said, the Big 12 can't win. Oklahoma got there time and again and could never win a game. TCU won a game. They did. They won a game against the team that would go on to then win the national championship the next year, and nobody talks about it. Nobody remembers it. Not at all. Why is that? Because the next game, they got beaten historically bad by Georgia in the national championship game. It was the biggest laugher that really any of us had ever seen in our lives in a game of that magnitude. And so that's what people remember about that team, to the point where Nick Saban still this season, after last year hilariously losing to Michigan in a college football playoff semifinal, was still complaining about how Alabama should have been in 22 instead of that TCU team. People's brains are just broken by what happened in that Georgia game, and you get no credit for winning the previous game. That's where everybody can just, fluke, whatever, weird. They just write it off. And so the setup to that is, if Arizona State had won, it would have been a cool storyline to think about, like the old Rose Bowl and the last time Arizona State was on this type of scene in the late 90s when they played Ohio State with Jake the Snake. But Ohio State's a different beast right now. That is not a team that I would want to play. They just made Oregon look completely silly, right? They got up 34-0 on Oregon. 34-0, 31-0, whatever. They had Oregon completely buried. It would be really dangerous to play them right now. It feels like they could name their number on just about anybody in the country at this point. And if that were to happen, then people start to forget the Texas thing. Maybe this is a little bit different because we did see Ohio State do it to Tennessee and then Oregon before Arizona State. So maybe you get a little bit more credit. But I don't know, man. I don't know. This feels like a scenario where that could have wound up being a at least a wash long term. If, it turns into a 40-point loss for Arizona State in a semifinal to Ohio State, which I'm not here. I understand, I'll stand for the Big 12. Cam Scatterbo and Arizona State impressed me. I did not give them nearly as much of a chance as what they had to win that game against Texas as they did, even as a guy who's supposed to be sitting here as a Big 12 homer. So maybe they would have proven me wrong. Will Howard, I am certainly well aware, can be very turnover prone. If it's a day where he's particularly turnover prone, maybe they do find a way to really hang around in that game. But there was definitely a risk was definitely a risk of another TCU situation happening and it wiping out some of the goodwill for the league. So here it's like, well, some people are out there saying that you should have beaten Texas because of the controversial call, and you can kind of live off of that and how well you played and 17.8 million people and be like, oh, damn, I guess maybe the Big 12 can actually play some football and just have that be the lasting impression. You can make a case, okay? You can make a case. I, again, would prefer to just hit the button and have them win the game, but there is a case to be made there. And John Wilner said it too, okay? So if you're going to come after me for it, sorry, John, I don't mean to send everybody at you. I'm saying that you are a smart man, and the fact that you said it, I think, should hold some credibility with some other people.